I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. My guest today is none other than a person we've had on here many times in the past, but in a different role. He's been on here as the leader of the United Democratic Movement and a member of Parliament. But today he's back, and we're talking about his new role as a Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Defense and Veterans Affairs, none other than Major General Bantu Holomisa. General, how are you today?
I'm fine, Chris. I'm looking forward to engaging you. Ask any questions about GNU and the future of South Africa, and also, of course, the past. I'm ready.
All right, well, just a second. Something weird going on here with my screen. I don't know why it's doing this, but it keeps showing. Just a second here. Well, I guess we're stuck with that for the broadcast, but it's showing the controls at the bottom. I don't know what that's all about. Zoom, it's doing its own thing. Well, questions about the GNU. I wasn't really going to go there, but I mean, that's, I think, more interest than the SANDF. So let me go ahead and enter into that since you've opened the door. All right, so the Government of National Unity, which I predicted, I said the ANC would come in at 38 to 42%. They hit 40%. I hit it on the nose, and I did that in November 2021 and stuck with when people told me I was crazy. But I said there'd have to be some sort of coalition. Now, I differ with the ANC and with the parties involved in this. I don't really consider Government of National Unity. I think it's a grand coalition. But whatever we call it, there is an agreement between 10 parties to work together to get South Africa going forward. Your party, UDM, is part of that. And you are serving as a deputy minister, once again, something you did previously back in the 1990s. You were a deputy minister. So how's it going with the GNU from your perspective?
I think we have started very well. We are coming from a workshop called Lekgotla here, wherein the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, tabled suggestions as to how do we move forward. And the focus was to concentrate on the implementation of the National Development Plan, which was drawn by us long before we even think of having a government of national unity. And also, of course, we were allocated tasks to say, guys, these are the priorities. And those priorities were identified during the talks or negotiations of forming a government of national unity, namely economy, poverty, crime, and so on and so on. So the parties have been, or rather the ministries have gone back to make sure that they implement some of these policies. Well, of course, we came very late in government, because the budget for 2024-25 financial year has already been committed. The focus now is looking at mid-term budget and also for the budget for 25-26 financial year. I can confidently say, contrary to what was always done in the past, where the government was defunding the National Defense Force, this time around, I think the President and the Minister of Finance are seeing a light that there has to be a turnaround in order to make sure that our defense is on a state of readiness.
Well, that's a good question to go with. I'm going to ask you that one. You know, it's important to discuss this. A lot of people, civilians, unfamiliar with how the military and defense work and the defense industry, as well as those who never served, don't understand or appreciate that you have to spend money to have a ready force. You have to have resources in there to keep the forces healthy, to train them. You don't just put on a uniform and show up. It takes a professional force, which South African National Defense Force is a professional force. But it's been abysmal what's happened with the budget the past several years. And let's go into that very quickly. The budget you're talking about has just 0.7% of gross domestic product dedicated to defense and veterans affairs. In a healthy military, normally we're expecting somewhere between 3.2 and 3.5% of a country's gross domestic product spent on the military. That has not been the case since the arms deal back in the late 1990s. And in fact, since 2018, we've seen the budget go from nearly 3.5 billion US dollars down to around 3 billion. And that's before we even consider the losses due to inflation, which have been pretty significant. So this must be a major challenge for you. It sounds like you've got a signal from the president and others that they're going to reverse course and at least hold the line or increase the budget a little bit going forward. Does that sound correct?
Yes, it's a big job for us. But fortunately, President Ramaphosa had issued an instruction that the budget, the 0.57% budget of the GDP in the defense must be increased to 1.5% of the GDP. Well, of course, it's not going to be happening only in 1 year, but it's good to hear that they are beginning to say, yes, we have staffed the defense because of a decision which was taken in 1998, a decision which said, let us invest more on social security rather than military security. So it's gratifying, therefore, that now he says he needs a change because he can still see the task of the defense force that is increasing on a daily basis.
Well, even with that increase, it's going to be a challenge. But nonetheless, any additional increase is going to be helpful for the military. Certainly, I'm not sure how much of that goes towards Veterans Affairs and their pensions and such and their health care. But for defense, anything at this point would be good, even holding the line, because it's a real challenge to maintain military equipment and readiness when you face such budgets. Like I said, to keep a healthy defense force, it's about 3.2 to 3.5%. The international average is 2%, which means most countries underspend on military. And at 1.5%, it would still be low when you get to that stage, but still, that'd be almost double what it currently is, which would be healthy for the force. You know, if, at that level, at 1.5%, if South Africa gets back to that, you'd actually be spending more in defense than Germany does. So that's, and of course, we know Donald Trump was not happy about Germany's expenditures on defense, trying to get them to spend more. So anyway, I think that's something that people need to be aware of. So that money's coming. Now, at the Defense Minister's presentation of Parliament, when Minister Angie Motshekga talked about the budget on July 15th, Action SA's MP had a few things to say about it. That was Lerato Ngubeni. And she basically, I'm going to read comments she said there. And she said, Minister, you have inherited a department that has been so severely mismanaged and underfunded for decades that as a consequence of this negligence, the safety and security of our country is at perilous risk. And she went on to talk about the challenges there. She says, what is apparent is that with this proposed budget, this government is frankly committed to maintain the shameful and dangerous status quo, which if left unchecked will have and already does have serious consequences. Ouch. Now, look, this is politics. Those are harsh words from a politician, an opposition party that's out there, Action SA. But I think we can both agree that it's been a real challenge, although it sounds, as you said, the president at least has made a commitment. Do you think that Parliament will follow through with the commitment the president's made in increasing that budget in the coming years?
Well, I'm hoping that they will take the word of the president. We are scheduled to meet the portfolio committee, I think, on the 8th and 9th. And we have already engaged, we're engaging currently the National Treasury to look into the problems. Fortunately, the Auditor General's report also has been issued, which would strengthen us to present to the Parliament and National Treasury as to how are we going to make sure that the consequence management policies are implemented and that the procurement policies as well are tightened, which were embarrassing the Department of Defense, where there were even serious allegations that the minister has helped herself with the service providers on corrupt related purchases. So we are applying what I would call a multi-pronged approach strategy. We look into administration, How can we improve? How can we make sure that those who have been implicated are charged properly? And how do we make sure that we put systems in place that won't have a qualified audit in the next 2 years?
Well, that's an interesting discussion we're having there, talking about corruption. Now, outside the SANDF in the civil sector, this is prevailing. It doesn't mean it's the majority opinion, but it's certainly a prevailing opinion that the SANDF has fallen on hard times. It's not capable of doing things. It's overstretched with border security, policing, fighting Zamazamas, deployments to the Congo and elsewhere. That the budget, the constraints against the force have really brought it down to capability. We can talk about readiness a little bit later on, but with the use of the military and all this going on, it would seem like a very fertile ground for people to commit corruption, if in fact that's the case. Do you believe, or do you think there's, or do you not believe that there's institutional corruption inside the SANDF itself? Or has it been a few key individuals and smaller fish that can be rooted out and prosecuted? I mean, in other words, do you need new measures for new accountability, or the existing measure is good enough? You just got to catch the fish that got away.
Well, there are few individuals which have been identified by military police and this security structures of the country. So they are dealing with that. That would not handicap the SANDF if it is given a mandate. So we are fit, we are ready. All what we need is just to get a budget to attend to low-hanging fruits, which are there, just maintain aircraft, buy new equipment. That's all. Otherwise, the soldiers are ready.
Well, that's good to hear. Now, let me go back to a question that I've been itching to ask for a long time. When the Government of National Unity was formed, and you said I could ask you any question, so I'm going to ask any question here. It's not an embarrassing one, but a lot of folks were surprised that you were appointed as a deputy minister. Many of us out here looking at the bones as we rolled them on the ground said, this is the perfect guy to be the defense minister, or home affairs, something like that, or traditional governance. But you came in as a deputy minister, and a lot of people are like, hey, we want Bantu Holomisa as defense minister. That guy has done it before. He knows what he's talking about. Were you surprised to be offered a deputy minister position, and was there potentially something else on the table and you took this as a bigger challenge?
Well, you can thank them on my behalf, but as a disciplined soldier, I carried the orders and I stayed on my lane when the president said he wants me to come and serve. So then I said, yes, I will serve, but I didn't demand as to what position do I want. When we negotiated the whole setup, my dream, and as it is contained in our manifesto, was that if there will be no government, there will be no outright winner. We must be ready for government of national unity. I said so in black and white. And so that dream was not personal for me. It was for a response to my analysis of the situation at the time. But as far as the appointment of being a Minister of Defense, no, it's not a big issue. In fact, I consider myself fortunate because the minister who was appointed, she has an experience. For the last 15 years, she has been in the cabinet. So if you talk corporate language, she would fare better than myself. And after all, she was in charge of professionals like she is now. She was in charge of teachers, and teachers were way more than the strength of the SANDF, and also the common denominator between what she was doing and what she is doing now is the word called discipline. So I'm not lost there, she's not lost there, and we're working together so well.
Well, of course, she does have recent experience, as you said, in the basic education ministry. She was there for about 15 years, and she's been in cabinet for a long time. But you've also served in cabinet previously under Madiba. You did it for a couple of years. And my question is the cabinet and working there different today than it was back then? Have things changed, or were you able to slide right back in, understanding your role as a deputy minister in cabinet?
Be a deputy minister locked in a corner there, not knowing what is going on. So the filing system has to via the deputy minister's office before it goes to the minister, just to arrange to recommend or make suggestions. So we're working very well, and she has also now appointed me to make sure that the 2015 defense review is implemented, and we have been busy in the last 2 months trying to make sure that the budget we submit will be a budget which would reflect on rescuing the decline of the defense. So that is my field. I'm happy with that.
Well, that kind of preempts the question I was going to ask you next, General, and that is, there are 2 deputy ministers in the ministry, if I'm not mistaken. What portfolio responsibilities were given? Is there a reason that they had 2 deputies? Is so they could divide the responsibilities because it's such a big challenge? I mean, anecdotally, that, from the outside, that would be my guess. The reason for having 2 deputy ministers is that you've both got portfolios that are particularly important and you can focus on them. Is that an accurate assessment, and what else is in your portfolio?
Well, not necessarily you are given 100% to run with the department alone, a particular section or military veterans. What we do here is that we have meetings on Monday at 7 a.m. through a virtual meeting. And then we allocate tasks to be done in that week or years. And then next following Monday, again, we report back at 7 a.m. to the minister, and the minister will be given her task. The other deputy is given his task, and I have been given my own task. Then we report back. So we didn't want to have a situation where we say, Department of Veterans must be responsible, so-and-so is responsible alone. So collectively, I know what is happening in other sections. I've already reported back, for instance, the progress on the 2015 defense review to the small committee, that is myself, other deputy, and the minister. So we are running that department collectively, but with a specific individual who makes sure that during the day, administration, he or she is involved in making sure that the progress is monitored. The minister, we will ask her, for instance, to look into the question of budget systems. When is the next meeting with our treasury? When must we be ready to submit that report? And then the chiefs of defense force, we meet them, of course, when we have a council on defense. So everybody is working.
Well, you've been in position for just a few months now back as a deputy minister. I don't know if you've had the opportunity. I have seen that you have done some site visits. For instance, when the Chinese hospital ship arrived, we were there. You were part of that. But have you had a chance to get out and meet troops? And I'm not talking about generals, but I'm talking about lieutenants and sergeants major and such. Have you met any troops and do you talk to them? And if so, what's the sentiment? How's the morale in the SANDF? Is it uneven? Is it good? Is it bad? And how are soldiers feeling, if you've had that chance to talk to them?
Yes, we have been to Navy, Air Force, Army, medical health section, administration. The next round now after October, we'll be visiting units outside South Africa and also in the borders. But so far, the soldiers are happy, they are hopeful, and also the fact that we are more transparent now than before. They know what is happening, and we're keeping them informed. I'm sure you might have noticed that even in the social media.
Well, the reason I asked the question about the morale of the soldiers is that on my last visit to South Africa, which was before the elections, and the one prior to that, I did talk to soldiers in multiple locations across South Africa, and the sentiment was a lot of people are frustrated. Particularly, I saw in Cape Town, soldiers from different parts of the country were down there just really frustrated. They weren't really doing much, but I have seen that the forces are still doing some things. For instance, at Lohatla, you just had an exercise, 14,000 troops. That's I think it's pronounced Vukuloma exercise at Lohatla. So there is some training going on. So what you're saying is that soldiers are happy. That I presume that's because of a change in direction that is taking place now with the new leadership.
Precisely. Let me put it this way. They have hopes, and especially that at least the president has publicly said the defunding of the SANDF must come to an end.
Well, I think that that's the case. Look, we're both veterans, and we know the importance of funds to keep a force going. And people lose sight of the fact. They think the military is just there to invade other countries. That's not the sole role. And let me shift attention to that. Section 200, subparagraph 2 of the South African Constitution in 1996 establishes the legal uses of the military, including for territorial integrity and domestic employment, comes under the Defense Act, sections 18 to 20. That's deployment for domestic purposes. We've seen the SANDF used for policing, We've seen them in the unrest in KZN back in 2021. Traditionally, they've done border security with up to 7 infantry companies patrolling the border. But recently, President Ramaphosa ordered the military to do counter Zama operations under something called Operation Prosper. Is that still going on? And that's kind of an unusual role for the military, trying to stop illegal mining. I think that caught a lot of us by surprise, the use of the military. How's that going?
They are still there. And we will get a report back to withdraw them when they have achieved their mission. They are not working alone there. They're working with the police. We are also, as you know, we had an embarrassment of sabotage in a number of power stations. The soldiers were deployed there. And since then, we didn't hear any sign of a load shedding. So it's clear that the load shedding in South Africa there was an element of sabotage where people stole the cables and so on and so on. But all that, it means therefore that we don't have soldiers only to wait for the war convention to kick off. Where there are emergency areas, we have to deploy them and help them in terms of the laws. And so far, I think the soldiers have done a good job.
Well, that's an interesting update. I think a lot of people don't realize that they're not only fighting the miners, but protecting strategic infrastructure, which is interesting. But also, unrelated to your portfolio in defense, it speaks to a greater problem of crime across South Africa. It's really a challenge for South Africans. Let me talk something that's probably a sensitive topic for those in uniform, but it's a topic that you and I can certainly address. There's a perception outside the forces about the physical fitness of the defense force, the overall health status of it. And my question is not, commenting on people's weight or obesity, but I think there are real questions here. And I'm also seeing it in my forces now. I mean, I go back to the base and I see a huge change in the 5 years since I've retired in the physical fitness of our military. And I don't understand why it's happening. But anecdotally, we see this with people in uniform. But is this having an impact on readiness? In other words, lifestyle diseases, things that are largely a consequence of lifestyle, like type 2 diabetes and hypertension, are these significant problems for the SANDF, especially among senior leaders? Is that something that the force has to focus on?
Well, unfortunately, President Ramaphosa had expressed concerns, especially around the need to rejuvenate our defense force. He was not happy at all that we still have a 45-year troopy being a soldier. So we are busy with that under the Defense Force Review of 2015. to make sure that there is a proper exit for people who have contributed, and they must go back and relax at home and bring new energy in the defense. Yes, that is our program.
Well, I think it's an important one because those costs can be quite significant. If you have to spend a lot of time and money on the fitness of your personnel, or as you said, 45-year-old troopy, that's something that I was talking about and analyzing 20 years ago, was the fact that the South African National Defense Force had thousands of soldiers in their 40s and 50s who were privates and corporal equivalents, and that's not a healthy force. You need 18, 19, 22-year-olds to be your troopies, not 45-year-olds. Okay, so that talks a little bit about the fitness of the force, but what about the fitness of equipment? The South African National Defense Force, of course, famously had a huge arms deal, and we won't get into that. That's not the topic for you or me today. People know the history of that. But that arms deal acquired the Hawk lead-in fighter trainers, the Gripens for the Air Force, the Type 209 diesel submarines, the frigates or corvettes, whatever people want to call them, for the Navy. But it did nothing for the Army. The Army needed new personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, upgraded helicopters. It also needed additional trucks, prime movers. So one challenge with the South African National Defense Force since the end of the apartheid era has been now aging equipment, especially the prime movers. I mean, we're still relying on Rattels and Caspers. There have been many proposals and projects to upgrade and replace these essential items, and we'll talk about some of those. But what's that like now? Because much of the South African defense industry, what's left of it, Denel, or what was Arms Corps, actually is exporting its products. So is this a significant challenge? I know it was addressed in the Defense Review. It was also addressed in a white paper back in the late 1990s. But money has been the major problem. Has that been the thing that's been slowing down the acquisition of new equipment, procurement, no money, or is it people aren't happy with what's out there?
Well, unfortunately, the interpretation of 1998 or instruction from the government that we are no longer going to invest on military security, but on social security. But the Air Force and Navy had luck in that they were replenished with new equipment. The big size of the defense, the Army, has never had that luxury. So that is why now the focus is on how do we equip the Army and also keep on maintaining Air Force and Navy. So a big chunk of capital, if we get it now, from now on, will be to rescue and help the infantry. That is the Army and the medical section. I think we are on the right track. And I'm also impressed with the knowledge you have about what is happening here. I don't know whether you are got a dual membership now in the SANDF. I have to check you and ask the state security that they must investigate this man. You seem to know more than us.
Well, I have been accused of being a CIA plant by some people. It's silly.
But on a serious note, you are spot on. And the Defense Review of 1998 didn't cater at all for the Army. But right now, after 2015, the department felt that they must do something for the Army because the equipment of the Army is obsolete. Already there are orders which have been placed by Arms Corps to improve the APC, armored plate personnel carriers. So we should be hitting the ground in the next 6 months with new equipment for the soldiers.
Well, one of those pieces of equipment that I'd like to talk about is I'll pronounce it wrong, an Afrikaans. I think it's pronounced a Hoofste, or the Badger infantry fighting vehicle. That was supposed to replace the Rattels, and that program was launched back in 2013. I believe some of those were actually delivered to the force last year. Is that in fact the case? Is that what we're talking about, the Badger infantry fighting vehicle?
That's one of them, but we are still struggling with that crew. That we have even said that matter must be investigated.
Ah, okay. Well, there you go. Maybe another procurement issue going on there when it comes to corruption. Okay, well, that's why we're having a conversation. Now, one of the big advancements in defense over the past 30 years is something that I was actually involved in as a young officer briefly, and then used it as an intelligence professional, and that's the use of unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs, that sort of thing. The South Africans have one now that has reportedly been in service, 5 of them. That's the Milcor 380. Now, that one gives you 35 hours of endurance. It's a rather large one. This is a capability that can be used for all kinds of things, for tactical purposes in the Congo, in a deployment. You could use it for border security, patrolling, and that sort of thing. Is this something that the Defense Force is going to get more of, or are they satisfied with what they've got now?
Well, the onus is on them. They will tell us. But what we are negotiating now with Treasury is that we must make sure that our defense force is in a state of readiness. When you talk of state of readiness, it's talking about a fit equipment, a new equipment, a fit troops, and also be ready to be carried to anywhere. And our special forces be ready to do the work assigned to them anytime. So far, that's where I'm focusing on. I hope the budget will allow us to do that.
Well, again, of course, that is what it really comes down to, the budget. And there's a lot of different things here we could talk about in the budget. But you talk about the ministry focused on readiness. One of those aspects the forces can do to maintain that readiness is exercises. A lot of casual observers have noticed that South Africa has done a naval exercise with China and with Russia, while Russia was in ongoing conflict with Ukraine. Also, we've seen the Chinese hospital ship come recently. But people seem to forget that the SANDF is doing SADC work in Mozambique, also in the Congo. It's done UN work in the Congo and elsewhere. And it does exercises with even the United States. And one of the largest exercises we've ever seen, I think 800 U.S. Marines went to Lokhatla just a couple years ago. So it seems to me that maybe part of the story here, and this is, I'm coming from an objective perspective, is that the SANDF, as part of its readiness, is doing training with multiple nations from different competing, I guess, political spectrums across the planet. Is that a fair statement?
It's a fair statement. We're actually implementing Nelson Mandela's foreign policy, that we must work with everybody. We are part of the global world, and that political ideologies and so on must not persist our work. If the USA, Russia, China, Ukraine, you name them, India, they want us to join in the joint exercises individually or collectively. We have been doing that all the years, so we're not new in that. In fact, even this coming weekend, I think there are vessels coming from ships from Asia to do the exercise with our Navy.
Well, there's, defense ministries, of course, help provide strategic direction for the defense forces and where it's going. One of these things that I think is important is a critical resource that's lacking. There was a plan to come up with something to replace it, but the C-130 fleet is aging and falling apart, and that's not from corruption or lack of maintenance, although that could play a role. It's because they're old. I mean, the planes are old. Also, there was a plan to buy the A400M, and then South Africa backed out of that program, so that didn't give it a strategic lift capability. Virtually the only country in all of Africa that has its own lift capability that's reliable, arguably, is Angola at this stage. Is that something that the Defense Ministry is taking a look at long term? What do we do for strategic lift for the South African National Defense Forces? Because, I mean, it's great if the politicians and the government say, okay, we're going to go do peacekeeping here, or we're going to get involved in this conflict here, or we're going to do maritime patrolling here. That's all great and dandy, but you can't do it if you don't have the lift to move resources around.
Oh, well, we have been looking around. Recently, we had an air show here in Pretoria. Many countries came and displayed their toys. I saw one big one from China. I saw another one from Brazil. And I'm sure the acquisition team within the department will advise us, because they have been trying a number of troop carriers since 133 is no longer reliable. So it's in the menu. I hope you can tell someone to pay for us in kind. Just donate it as a way of appreciating what we are doing in the world.
Well, maybe when Trump comes back, assuming he comes back, maybe he won't come back, but when the next administration, whoever it is, maybe we can look at some excess defense articles for South Africa, some of the newer model C-130s as we upgrade. Certainly that might be helpful for your lift capabilities. Here's something that I think most people are unaware of, and I'm not sure your knowledge of it, although you're pretty well informed, so I think you know this. But South Africa, strangely and interestingly from my perspective, has one of the most durable and reliable aircraft on the planet. Unfortunately, a few have been crashed. One in the Drakensberg, a horrible crash, and some are no longer available now. I don't know if they're flying, but for years and years, including under the current government, the C-47 Dakota was doing maritime patrolling for South Africa. I don't know if that's continuing. Are the C-47s, or any of them still flying? And if so, are we ever going to replace them? That's almost 100 years old.
Yeah, definitely no Dakotas. I think I was among the last people who used Dakota when we were doing a parachute course. So I've got wings from a Dakota, but it's no longer in use. I saw one here in Pretoria in the archives department. No more Dakotas. Caspers, yes, but they are too small. That's why we need the bigger aircraft.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, for lift, it's not really strategic lift. It's more operational and theater lift. The Botswana Defense Force has some Casas, the Spanish-built aircraft. They seem to meet their needs, but they're not big enough to do the heavy haul, the long-distance stuff, and carry sufficient things. But yeah, the Dakota, what a fascinating aircraft, and those things are still flying in the form of DC, whatever they call TC9s or whatever, in Canada with some of the folks up there. It's an amazing aircraft, but the airframes are getting old, approaching a century at this point. Anyway, so
Risky.
Yeah. Well, it becomes risky at some point. Yeah. But look, these days, what's going on with Boeing? I think at any plane might be a risk. I'm getting a little bit nervous about Boeing's planes. Now we find out the rudder controls aren't working on some of the 737s. Good Lord. Anyway, but let me shift the focus here, General Holomisa, and I want to ask you about your priorities as a deputy minister. What are the main priorities that you're focused on going forward in that role?
Well, the main focus now is to make sure that, firstly, we clean the procurement section by making sure that it cannot be an individual or two who must take a decision in the procurement, but a committee representing the armed forces, Navy, Air Force, Army, and medical section. They must sit in that procurement committee and make sure that there's transparency. And also we would even request that when tenders are looked at, there must be a representative from the Auditor General's office so that everybody knows what's going on. Secondly, is the question now of training. The training of the soldiers today is different from the old days during our time. You will find that the wars now, conventional warfare, are very limited. And the chances are that the technology is being used as a weapon to destroy an enemy position. So I don't have to go into detail on that, but more is training of the troops. And thirdly, is that the administration, especially in the Department of Military Veterans, we must keep a proper data and pay those people and their relatives a relevant amount. And then they must also be able to send their kids to school and health department. So those are the key ones. But the main one key is to convince the cabinet that there is a need to shift. There is a need for a paradigm shift to not just look at soldiers who are living in the barracks, but that those soldiers, if they are given irrelevant equipment, they can also participate in developing the country, like building bridges, building certain institutions, protecting national key points. So if they can help us on that, then I would know that we are on an ascendancy profile immediately.
Well, it's not exactly unheard of to use defense forces for things like that. One of the challenges I faced as the lead for the security sector reform for national defense when I rebuilt the Armed Forces of Liberia is that the minister there, now I had to deal with the minister directly, and it was at times rewarding, at times challenging, but the minister there insisted that the Army be used to grow food. And that's something the U.S. government opposed. We were paying for the reconstruction, rebuilding military. And so that eventually was disappeared. But there are other domestic roles, and you're kind of alluding to that. So here in the United States military, we have the Corps of Engineers. And the Corps of Engineers is responsible for, river management, riverine, maritime stuff all over the country. They help build dams and take care of floods and avoid all those things and do construction of other things. But we also see the domestic use of our military to fight forest fires. Botswana does the same. We don't do anti-poaching here because that's not an issue for us, but the BDF does do that. And we've seen the South African National Defense Force respond to internal insurrection, which is what we saw in KZN. We saw them work with the police, both in this operation going after Zama-Zamas and the protection of critical infrastructure. So the paradigm shift you're talking about is perhaps, if I understand, to be more involved in critical infrastructure and building infrastructure and playing a role to improve civil society.
Precisely, especially now that Southern Africa is being engulfed by climate change crisis almost every year. Recently, we had snow, and I was saying to the minister and the chief of the defense force that we should have equipment always on standby, but that equipment should only be kept in the military bases. So in each region, so that when there are problems of that nature, the soldiers can get in and clear the road.
Well, in fact, that's a rather apropos topic because, as you said, we just saw snow, particularly this very serious situation on the N3 and the Van Reenen Pass going down from into the KZN. That was pretty hectic. I saw that. I can give you an anecdotal story here in General Holomisa years ago. I was in Durban on a trip to South Africa. I think it was in 2000. And I was wearing shorts, and it wasn't particularly warm. It was, it was wintertime, but I'm comfortable in shorts. And so I got in the car. I think I stopped before I got too far down the road, got some petrol, filled up, and then didn't get out of the car again. But after I passed Pietermaritzburg and started heading up to the Drakensberg, it started to snow. And it's just a little bit of flakes coming down. And of course, I'm a Viking by descent, and I'm accustomed to cold weather and the snow, so it was nothing to me. But people were pulling off on the side of the road. I'm like, there's like no accumulation. I kept driving and driving and driving and driving. I got through Van Reenen Pass and then continued on. I got to Joburg. I pulled up in the parking lot. I walked into a Holiday Inn or something like that was where I was staying. And the man behind the counter looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "Sir, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He says, "It's snowing outside." I said, "It's no big deal." But apparently hundreds of motors were stranded then, and there was just a couple of centimeters of snow. I can't imagine how frustrating and life-threatening it could have been in this situation in the Van Reenen Pass when we had a lot of snow. So your point about the military having graders and things like that, snow plows, pre-position, I don't know if they have experience, but we use rock salt and chemicals to help clear the roads off and de-ice them. I think that's a very useful point to make. Whether it's the military resources and or civilian resources, that kind of coordination is critical to save lives.
No, it's needed because there seems to be a paradigm shift not a paradigm shift, but a certain culture where the people of South Africa, when there's a crisis, they immediately call for police or soldiers. Why our soldiers are not here? They must come and remove this for us. So let us think ahead and be proactive.
No, I think it's a good point. Being proactive is critical, and it's great that the ministry is looking at that to push that policy down to the services. Now, I want to ask a question. You brought up veterans because Veterans Affairs is part of what the ministry does. And I don't know the story on this. I know anecdotally from hundreds of veterans, black, white, and colored, from the old South African Defense Forces, that they tell me that they receive no pension. I don't know if that's true, or if that is the case, why that is. It's certainly, whatever decision that is, if that's true, predates your time in the ministry. Is that the case? Are veterans payments only going to struggle veterans who served in MK and other places, or does it also go to those who served in the Transkei Defense Force and Bophuthatswana and old SANDF veterans?
Yes, there was not a legislation, but a rule by the former Minister of Defense to the effect that the special pensions will be paid to those who were who fought in liberation, or who fought for liberation. But I cautioned Parliament, and President Ramaphosa at the time listened when I said people must not forget that in a conflict of South Africa between black and white, militarily speaking, there was no winner. So nobody can come here and say he or she liberated South Africa through military means. Therefore, we must come up with a legislation which would accommodate everybody, whoever, whether we were a guerrilla, you were what, and so on. In 2011, then an act was passed which says anyone who was trained is eligible to claim for that pension, anyone who was a soldier. So what I know is that they are getting a stipend now as a result of my intervention then, where they are paid the same amount of money. So I don't think that is still an issue anymore.
Well, thank you for that. That's something I've never been able to get a straight answer on because I've not talked to the right people. It sounds like I've talked to the right person now. I appreciate that. Also, I appreciate your sentiment. What you said about the conflict and the struggle. It wasn't a military solution in the end on either side. It was a negotiated settlement politically, and that's what brought the apartheid era to an end. And we've moved on from there. That's good. So it's refreshing. But of course, we know your history. You're from Transkei. You served there, and your background there. So you have a little bit of a different angle than many people. And you also were inside the ANC at one point, and then outside the ANC. And so that kind of, I think, gives you a perspective about what's happened in the history of South Africa. But at this point, General, you're getting to be. You're not wearing one. You're not sporting one like me, but you're definitely getting to be a gray beard. You're getting up there, fella.
I'm going to be what?
You're getting up there. You're not a spring chicken anymore.
Oh yes. No. I'm matured. I have to share some advices properly and guide the people and come up with the wisdom.
Well, that's where I was getting at, the gray beard. That's the folks we turn to, the elders with the wisdom. You definitely are in that role now, but you've definitely got the experience from all those years doing it. Let me shift a little bit before we wrap up today, and I want to ask you about the UDM. What's going on with the UDM? Do you have a next generation of leaders? Is the party going to survive? I'm assuming you're going to tell me it's going to survive, but where's the UDM going? Is it hoping to grow its base? Because we've talked about this a few times, and over the years, the vote total has come down, but where does UDM go from here?
The UDM is here to stay, and I've given reins in Parliament to my deputy, to say, I'm the person in the GNU. You are still going to be you will be the face of the UDM in Parliament and outside the structures. You are free to ask any questions to any minister, including myself, as part of in promoting checks and balances. This is what we have been promoting as the UDM. So the UDM is here to stay, and they are doing very well in Parliament so far. And I'm satisfied that this government of national unity is live and about, and to make sure that there are no shenanigans. people must do the work. And I also insisted during the Lekotla meeting with the other ministers that the main threat to the government of national unity would be if the ministers continue to appoint DGs or pull the directors general from their pockets. That responsibility should be left entirely to the Public Service Commission and Office of the President. No minister must issue directives which are laced with corruption. Otherwise, we will not be different from the old government. So I'm satisfied because for the first time I see now the DGs, Directors General, have got a proper forum to discuss policies and table those policies to us. And then we can say, all right, let's do an oversight on this. So things are changing slowly.
Well, that's actually a very important point that you bring up apropos, and that's directors general. That's a topic that most people outside government don't appreciate the importance of the role there. And if that's a catered deployment or, a patronage deployment, it isn't necessarily a good thing for the people. And they talk about the public service, and that's really where it needs to come from. And so it is interesting that you've got to focus on that. The Democratic Alliance made some big noise about that a few months ago about appointment directors general. So you think that that's actually going very well at the moment?
Yes, going on well.
All right. Well, I do have a question for you when it comes to appointment of people. I don't know who your chief of staff is. Any chance?
The chief of staff.
I'm just teasing. You don't have to tell me your chief of staff is. I just have a little go because someone else's chief of staff gained a bit of a notoriety recently.
No, I do have a chief of staff. It's Inga Ndibongo de Villiers. I do have a chief of staff, very competent individual. Her father was a Pan-Africanist Congress member, senior member. He was in exile. I think he stayed also in USA. I think so. And he came back in South Africa in 86 or 87, if I'm not mistaken. He's from my town.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. So one thing that before we do wrap up, the multi-party charter. Now, I covered that convention last year at Emperor's Palace, which is ironic because that's where CODESA was at 30 years prior. But I was over 30 years prior. But I was there, and the UDM was absent. You didn't join the multi-party charter. Some people shook their head and scratched their head and said, "What's going on?" But then you did join the Government of National Unity.
No, multi-charter, what do you call it? Multiple, what do you call it?
Multi-party charter, MPC. With the so-called Steenhuisen Moonshot Pact was renamed MPC.
That thing which changed name after I said they can go to the moon. I'll wait for them when they come back from the moon. They came back with that new name, Multiple Charter Party. No, the UTM didn't join that right from the word go. Because I tabled a strategy of how to approach 2024 as opposition parties. And unfortunately, DA, out of the blue, from their Congress, they said, no, they are going to have this moonshot. But as you know, it didn't work. And I could see that if one is just ganging up against the ANC without a proper foundation, it's not going to work. Yes, UDM joined the Government of National Unity. We followed what we preached in our manifesto. We predicted that the elections of 2024, there seems to be an emerging consensus that there will be no outright winner. As a result, we may have the formation of a coalition government or a government of national unity. So this has been our baby, the GNU. So we joined it without wanted not a single condition. But we said as long as the preamble and the objective of the main GNU is to help every South African, and in particular those who are still languishing in squalor.
Indeed, and that's a lot of folks, millions of folks living in substandard conditions. It's unfortunate at this stage. It's another discussion for another day, but definitely one that we should have talking about that. But yeah, no, so I appreciate where the UDM's position is. And in fact, we spoke before the election about your manifesto and where you were going, and you've done exactly what you said you're going to do. So I was in South Africa, of course, for the elections. Now, I obviously couldn't be in all of the country, but I was in the Western Cape, and I got there the night before the elections. Almost didn't make it because my flight, one of them got canceled. I had to drive like 130 kilometers an hour for 140 kilometers to get to another airport just to make my flight because they moved it. But I was there, and I went to 14 different polling stations in the Western Cape, starting in Somerset West. Then I was in the Cape Flats. I went to 5 polling stations in Khayelitsha. I went to Monenberg, and then from there, Rondebosch, Sea Point, Parklands, all over the Cape Town metro area and in the Cape Flats. And what I can say from my perspective is it was a very calm, very well organized. There were some problems at a few polling stations because they had insufficient scanners and things like that, and just the conduct. Some of the independent electoral commissions people weren't well trained, in my view. Being a judge of elections, I know how you're supposed to run a polling station. But what I want to say is that all in all, I thought it was a very well run election. However, the turnout was very low. That's one thing. And I think that's one reason why they were able to run it well, is because the turnout was low. I don't think many of the stations were actually prepared if there had been a surge of voters coming in. Now, you have people in the UDM and people you know in government that were all over the country and have a view on this. What was the feedback you got from your team about the conduct of the elections? Were they happy with it, or were there challenges in any places?
Not much, but as you know, you see the smaller parties don't have luxury of access to resources to patrol all the voting stations. But those which we identified as problematic, we did report them to IEC, and IEC acted on the spot, where, for instance, a member is a member of the ruling party, end up being a party agent. And IEC didn't mince their words. They would remove a person like that immediately. So there isn't much really we can say about election. Other than that, they need to improve. That is the Independent Electoral Commission. They need to improve the lines of communications because it takes time for them to respond. And when they come with the response, and then they don't come up with a tangible result.
Well, there's a question from one of my viewers. I was hesitant to ask it at first because I don't recall, and so maybe you can tell us. But we've seen that the appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal for former public protector Busisiwe Makwabane was rejected out of hand by the court. And that fact, they admonished Dalian Mpofu, who was her attorney. But one of my viewers is asking why UDM voted with the EFF to keep her as the public protector when she was clearly corrupt and incompetent. I don't know if we knew that. Is that in fact the case? Did the UDM vote to retain her as the public protector? I don't recall.
Yes, we did so. Each party has got a principle to follow. We didn't take it kindly that the public protector, when she asked questions to the head of the government, instead of answering those questions, he would immediately suspend her. So we thought, no, this is not on. We are not the first ones. They did the same thing, the ANC, to the Thuli Madonsela. When Thuli Madonsela was gunning for their president, have confronted him with evidence. Then they attacked him. They attacked that public protector, calling her, Thuli Madonsela, as a CIA agent, an agent provocateur. It's anti-revolutionary. It was this UDM and Holomisa again who stood up and said, "You dare to touch Thuli Madonsela." So Mkhwebana did not steal a cent In fact, he didn't have qualified audit reports during her time. And to use only 3 or 4 cases here, which she has lost in court, to say you're going to punish her for that. What about the judges, which normally loses cases after cases? Do you impeach them? So that's not on. I don't regret having stood up against that decision.
Well, no, impeaching judges seems to take forever. Look how long it took to impeach John Schlope in the Western Cape, and he just moved on to the MK. Now he's leading them in Parliament. So,
No.
No, look, I appreciate the frankness and transparency about the decision, and I do remember that previous one when they went after the president, the public protector, saying, "Hey, you've done something wrong." Then the response from the system was to go after the public protector, and so. And from that perspective, I would argue that your party stood up and did the right thing because, in my view, people were abusing the system. When it's kind of like I was not happy. Look, General, I didn't like the concept of the Scorpions. I was concerned about that body having all that power and capability to investigate, to prosecute crimes, all that, arrest warrants, all that. But then when they actually worked, they seemed to do a pretty good job. But then they were taken away. So when they were taken away, I'm like, why are you taking them away? The Hawks aren't exactly the same thing. So it's, you get what you want. You don't get what you want sometimes.
That's true.
All right, well, let me go ahead and wrap it up here. I appreciate your time. And you have the distinction on my program being the first sitting member in cabinet to actually come on the program. We've had lots of party leaders on this program before, lots of politicians in the U.S. and in Europe and also from South Africa. But you're the first. We've had members of parliament from South Africa. We've not had someone who's in the cabinet. So I appreciate that. I want to thank you for that. Bye-bye, Donkey Kelobo, for coming on. But if there's anything, you're very welcome. Is there anything you'd like to share, maybe thoughts about defense or about South Africa, about the GNU, about where we're going from here? I'll give you a couple moments if you'd like to say some closing remarks.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about our country and where we are heading to, and the fact that the checks and balances are being implemented in our systems, which would look positive even to the investors outside the country and inside. So let's shoulder on and move.
All right, so thank you very much, Major General Bantu Holomisa, Deputy Minister for Defense and Veterans Affairs. Thank you, sir. Have a lovely day, and we'll keep an eye on what's going on and hope that budget increases for defense.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that's Major General Bantu Holomisa, who's dropping off, and I thank him for being with us today. I really appreciate that. Is he still there? All right, there you go. So thanks a lot to General Holomisa. I do appreciate him being here. Now we finally got that menu off. It was locked earlier. I don't know what happened. But I hope I put that full screen up so that you guys could get a better view of the General because he couldn't get the horizontal working properly. We had a little bit of a technical challenge. That's why we're late starting this. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Deputy Minister in Defense. It was an interesting conversation. I'm working on having another member of the Cabinet on the program, hopefully soon, and we're going to talk about other issues in South Africa. Listen, appreciate the comments in the chat, and I appreciate some of the questions. I asked the questions I was able to get to, but the point here was to talk about defense in general, the bigger perspective of what's going on and the challenges faced by it. So it was interesting to get his perspective. Also, I was curious about those C-47 Dakotas. Those incredible aircraft, but they're not flying anymore. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot. We'll get set. Moonchild did ask your question, and he answered it. We'll get set for the news program coming up at the top of the next hour, and I thank you all for being here. God bless, and have a lovely evening or afternoon, depending where you are around the world. If you're out on the other side of the world, this morning. And I'll be back shortly with the news, and I got to prep for that. So thanks a lot. We'll see you guys shortly, and cheers. Bye-bye.
I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming, it's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just